Something unprecedented is happening in global finance, and most people have no idea it's unfolding right in front of them. For the first time since 1944, when the world gathered at Bretton Woods to crown the dollar as the global reserve currency, the international monetary system is splitting in two. Not collapsing, not transitioning from one hegemon to another, splitting into two competing systems. On one side, the United States and its allies, clinging to the dollar-based order that has dominated for 80 years. On the other side, China, Russia, and a growing coalition of nations building an alternative system, one increasingly backed by gold, commodities, and bilateral currency arrangements that bypass the dollar entirely. This isn't theory. This isn't speculation. In November 2025, the evidence is everywhere. China has been accumulating gold at an unprecedented pace, officially adding to its reserves for 18 consecutive months through September. The BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, now expanded to include Iran, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Egypt, and Ethiopia, are actively constructing payment systems that don't touch Western banks. Saudi Arabia, America's oldest petrodollar partner, has been accepting yuan for oil sales. And throughout 2024 and 2025, discussions around a BRICS currency unit partially backed by gold have intensified. The world isn't ending, but it is dividing. And if history teaches us anything, it's that when the global monetary system splits, fortunes are made, fortunes are lost, and ordinary people pay the price if they don't understand which side of the line they're standing on. To understand what's happening now, we need to go back to the last time the world's reserve currency changed hands. Not the collapse of Rome or Spain, those were imperial disintegrations. We need to look at 1944, when the British pound lost its crown and the American dollar took over, because that transition holds the blueprint for what we're witnessing today. In 1914, Britain was the undisputed financial superpower. The pound sterling was the world's reserve currency. Over 60% of global trade was invoiced in pounds. London was the financial capital of the world. British banks financed railways in Argentina, mines in South Africa, and infrastructure across Asia. The sun never set on the British Empire, and the pound never lost its value, until it did. World War I shattered Britain's finances. The war cost Britain everything. By 1918, the national debt had increased tenfold. Britain had borrowed massively from the United States to fund the war effort, and critically, Britain had been forced off the gold standard in 1914 to print money for the war. The pound, which had been as good as gold for centuries, became a fiat currency, backed only by the government's promise. After the war, Britain tried desperately to restore the old order. In 1925, Winston Churchill, then Chancellor of the Exchequer, put Britain back on the gold standard at the pre-war exchange rate. It was a catastrophic mistake. The pound was overvalued. British exports became uncompetitive. Employment soared. And in 1931, Britain was forced off gold again, permanently. Meanwhile, the United States had emerged from World War I as the world's largest creditor nation. America held the gold. American industry was booming, and the dollar, still backed by gold, was becoming the currency the world trusted most. But the official transition didn't happen until Bretton Woods in 1944. With World War II still raging, representatives from 44 nations gathered in New Hampshire to redesign the global financial system. Britain, represented by the economist John Maynard Keynes, fought desperately to preserve the pound's status. Keynes proposed a new international currency called the Bancor that would be neutral, not controlled by any single nation. The United States, represented by Harry Dexter White, had other ideas. America held most of the world's gold. America had the strongest economy, and America wanted the dollar to be the new global standard. The U.S. won. The Bretton Woods system made the dollar the world's reserve currency, backed by gold at $35 per ounce. Other nations pegged their currencies to the dollar, and the pound was relegated to second-tier status. For Britain, the consequences were brutal. The empire disintegrated within a generation. India gained independence in 1947. The Suez Crisis in 1956 humiliated Britain on the world stage. By the 1970s, Britain was on the verge of becoming a failed state, inflation at 25%, begging the IMF for a bailout. The loss of reserve currency status didn't just hurt British prestige, it destroyed British wealth. But here's what's crucial. The transition from pound to dollar didn't happen overnight. It took decades. From 1914, when the cracks first appeared, to 1944, when the transition was formalized, to the 1970s, when the pound fully lost its relevance. That's 60 years. Slow, painful, and irreversible. The nations that recognized the shift early, those that accumulated dollars, those that aligned with American power, prospered. The nations that clung to the old system, that kept their reserves in pounds, that bet on British recovery, they paid dearly. And that's the pattern we're seeing now. Not a sudden collapse, but a structural shift that will take years, possibly decades, to fully play out. The question isn't whether the dollar will disappear tomorrow. The question is whether we're at 1914, 1931, or 1944 in this new transition. And the evidence suggests we're somewhere between the first crack and the formal break. China understood this decades ago. While Western economists were declaring the end of history and the permanent triumph of dollar hegemony, China was quietly studying what happened to Britain. They watched how losing reserve currency status gutted British power. They studied how America accumulated gold before demanding the crown, and they decided they would never be dependent on someone else's currency. The numbers tell the story. In the year 2000, China held roughly 395 tons of gold in its official reserves. By 2015, that had grown to about 1,658 tons. By 2019, it had reached approximately 1,948 tons. And then the acceleration began. From November 2022 through September 2024, China's central bank reported buying gold for 18 consecutive months. Official reserves now stand at over 2,264 tons. But here's what matters. Nobody believes those official numbers. China's actual gold holdings are almost certainly far higher. The country is the world's largest gold producer, mining roughly 370 tons per year, and none of that production leaves the country. China is also the world's largest gold importer, bringing in hundreds of tons annually through Hong Kong and Shanghai. Where does it all go? Into reserves that aren't publicly reported, into sovereign wealth funds, into state-owned banks. Analysts estimate China's true gold reserves could be anywhere from 4,000 to 20,000 tons. The secrecy is strategic. If China revealed the full extent of its gold accumulation, it would trigger panic in dollar markets and drive gold prices even higher before they've finished accumulating. So they buy quietly, consistently, and without fanfare. Russia followed a similar pattern. In 2007, Russia held about 400 tons of gold. By 2022, that had grown to over 2,300 tons, making Russia one of the top 5 gold holders in the world. And critically, Russia did this while simultaneously reducing its dollar reserves. In 2018, Russia dumped nearly $100 billion in U.S. Treasury holdings in a single quarter. The message was clear. We don't trust your currency, and we're moving to hard assets. When Western sanctions froze Russian dollar reserves after the invasion of Ukraine, it confirmed what many nations had feared. The dollar isn't just a currency. It's a weapon. And if it can be used against Russia, it can be used against anyone. That realization has driven a wave of de-dollarization that's accelerating month by month. The BRICS nations aren't just talking about alternatives anymore. They're building them. In October 2024, the BRICS summit in Kazan, Russia, brought together leaders representing nearly half the world's population. The discussions weren't about whether to create alternatives to the dollar. They were about how fast they could implement them. The BRICS pay system is designed to facilitate cross-border payments without using SWIFT, the Western-controlled messaging system that underpins most international transactions. It's not theoretical. Pilot programs are already running. Russia and China are settling energy deals in yuan and rubles. India is buying Russian oil with rupees and dirhams. Brazil and China are trading directly in their own currencies. Each of these bilateral arrangements is a small crack in dollar dominance, and the cracks are multiplying. But the most significant development is the discussion of a BRICS currency unit. Not a single currency like the euro, but a basket of currencies and commodities that could be used for trade settlement between member nations. And here's where gold enters the picture. Multiple proposals have suggested backing this unit partially with gold, giving it the kind of tangible anchor the dollar abandoned in 1971. Think about what this means. If BRICS nations, representing 45% of the world's population and a growing share of global GDP, create a trade settlement currency backed by gold and commodity, it offers the rest of the world an alternative to the dollar for the first time in 80 years. Nations that are tired of dollar volatility, tired of Western sanctions, tired of watching their dollar reserves lose purchasing power to inflation, they now have somewhere else to go. Saudi Arabia's position is particularly telling. For 50 years, the petrodollar system has been the bedrock of dollar dominance. In 1974, the United States struck a deal with Saudi Arabia. The Saudis would price oil exclusively in dollars, and in return, America would provide military protection and buy Saudi debt. Every nation that wanted oil had to hold dollars. This created permanent demand for the currency and allowed America to run unlimited deficits. But in 2023 and 2024, that arrangement began to crack. Saudi Arabia started accepting yuan for oil sales to China. The 50-year petrodollar agreement that was supposedly renewed automatically was left to quietly expire without fanfare. Saudi Arabia joined the BRICS group as a partner nation, and Saudi officials have publicly discussed the possibility of pricing oil in multiple currencies. This isn't about Saudi Arabia hating America. It's about Saudi Arabia reading the map. They see China as the world's largest oil importer. They see the yuan becoming more widely used in Asian trade. They see the writing on the wall, and they're hedging. Just like smart investors diversify their portfolios, Saudi Arabia is diversifying its currency exposure. And when the nation that created the petrodollar system starts accepting alternatives, the message to the rest of the world is deafening. The United Arab Emirates has made similar moves. The UAE has become a major gold trading hub, with Dubai handling hundreds of tons of physical gold annually. They've established yuan clearing banks, they've joined BRICS. They're building the infrastructure for a post-dollar world while still maintaining good relations with the West. It's strategic positioning for a multipolar future. Even America's allies are quietly preparing. France has repatriated much of its gold from New York. Germany did the same. These aren't hostile actions, but they're revealing. When your allies start bringing their gold home, it suggests they're not entirely confident in the existing arrangement. Central banks globally have been net buyers of gold for 14 consecutive years as of 2024. In 2022, central banks bought over 1,000 tons of gold, the highest annual purchase since 1967. In 2023, they bought another 1,000 plus tons. This isn't a coincidence. This is a coordinated shift away from fiat currencies and toward hard assets. And it's happening precisely as the dollar's reserve status is being questioned. Now, here's where we need to separate reality from fantasy. There's a lot of hype around gold-backed currencies, much of it misleading. China isn't about to announce a gold-backed yuan tomorrow that replaces the dollar next week. That's not how currency transitions work, and it's not what China wants. China doesn't need the yuan to become the global reserve currency. In fact, that might not even be their goal. What China wants is a multipolar currency system, where no single nation has the power to freeze assets, impose sanctions, or export inflation to the rest of the world through unlimited money printing. They want alternatives, not dominance. A fully gold-backed currency has serious limitations. It restricts your ability to conduct monetary policy. It makes your currency more volatile based on gold price swings. It limits your flexibility during economic crises. China watched what happened when Britain tried to return to gold in 1925. It nearly destroyed their economy. They're not going to make the same mistake. What's more likely is a partial backing system, a currency or trade settlement unit that's backed by a basket of assets: gold, other precious metals, commodities like oil and wheat. and a mix of BRICS member currencies. This gives you the stability and trust that comes from tangible backing, while maintaining enough flexibility to manage the currency effectively. The model here isn't the pre-1971 gold standard. It's something new, designed for a world where digital payments, commodity trade, and geopolitical diversification all matter. And it doesn't need to replace the dollar to succeed. It just needs to provide a credible alternative.
That's the word that matters most. Alternative. For 80 years, there's been no alternative to the dollar for international trade. If you wanted to buy oil, you needed dollars. If you wanted to hold safe reserves, you bought U.S. treasuries. If you wanted to make international payments, you used SWIFT and dollar correspondent banks. There was no other option. But alternatives are emerging. Not perfect alternatives, not immediate replacements, but viable options that didn't exist 5 years ago. And once alternatives exist, the monopoly is broken. The dollar doesn't need to collapse for this to matter. It just needs to lose its exclusive status. Think of it like this. Imagine there's only one grocery store in town. They can charge whatever they want, treat customers however they want, because there's nowhere else to go. Then a second grocery store opens across the street. The first store doesn't disappear overnight, but they can't charge outrageous prices anymore. They can't ignore customer complaints. Competition changes behavior, even if the original store remains bigger. That's what's happening to the dollar. The Federal Reserve has printed trillions since 2008. U.S. national debt exceeds $36 trillion as of 2025. The deficit grows every year, regardless of which party controls Congress. Inflation has eroded purchasing power faster than wages have grown for most Americans. And the use of sanctions as a foreign policy tool has made even friendly nations nervous about keeping all their reserves in dollars.
For decades, the world had no choice but to absorb these problems. Now they have options, and they're taking them. The bifurcation we're witnessing isn't just about currency, it's about the entire structure of global power. The dollar-based system, anchored by American military dominance, Western financial institutions, and the post-World War II order, is being challenged by a commodity-based system anchored by manufacturing power, resource wealth, and a coalition of nations that want more autonomy. This isn't good versus evil. This isn't democracy versus authoritarianism. This is simply power redistribution. The United States emerged from World War II with half the world's GDP, most of its gold, and the only major industrial base that hadn't been bombed to rubble. That dominance was never going to last forever. China now produces more steel in a year than the United States has produced cumulatively in its entire history. India's population has surpassed China's. The global south is rising economically, while the west faces demographic decline and debt burden. The currency system reflects these underlying realities. And as those realities shift, so must the currency system. So, what does this mean for you? Whether you're an investor, a business owner, or someone just trying to protect your savings, the bifurcation matters because it will affect the value of everything you own. If you hold most of your wealth in dollar-denominated assets, cash, bonds, stocks in U.S. markets, you're betting that the dollar maintains its dominance, or at least its stability. That might be a good bet. The dollar still accounts for roughly 58% of global reserves as of 2024. The U.S. economy is still massive. American military power is still unmatched. The transition away from the dollar could take decades, just like the transition from the pound did. But it's no longer a certainty. The trend is clear, and the trend is away from dollar exclusivity. Every year, the dollar's share of global reserves declines a bit more. Every year, more trade is settled in alternative currency. Every year, more central banks buy gold instead of treasuries. The smart move isn't to panic and dump all your dollars tomorrow. The smart move is diversification. Hold some assets outside the dollar system. Gold is the obvious choice because it's exactly what central banks are buying. Not gold stocks or gold ETFs, but physical gold that you control. The nations positioning for a post-dollar world aren't buying paper claims on gold. They're buying bars and storing them in their own vaults.
Real estate in stable markets can work, though it's less liquid. Productive assets, businesses, farmland, infrastructure that generates real value, hold up regardless of currency games. And if you're internationally minded, holding some exposure to other currencies, particularly those of commodity-rich nations or manufacturing powerhouses, provides a hedge. The key is understanding that we're not in a stable system anymore. We're in a transition. And transitions are volatile, unpredictable, and dangerous for those who don't see them coming. History offers one more lesson, and it's perhaps the most important. During currency transitions, the middle class gets destroyed. When Britain lost reserve status, it wasn't the aristocracy that suffered most. They held land, gold, foreign assets. It was the middle class with pensions denominated in pounds, with savings in British banks, with jobs dependent on British industry. Their purchasing power evaporated. When Weimar Germany experienced hyperinflation, it wasn't the wealthy industrialists who starved. They held real assets and foreign currency. It was the pensioners, the civil servants, the shopkeepers who saw their life savings become worthless overnight. The pattern is always the same. The elites see the transition coming and position themselves accordingly. The ordinary people, told by their governments that everything is fine, wake up one day to discover their wealth has been quietly transferred away. Right now, central banks are buying gold at record pace. Billionaires are diversifying into hard assets. Nations are building alternative payment systems. These are not the actions of people who believe the current system is stable. These are the actions of people positioning for what comes next. The bifurcation is real. The dollar isn't going to disappear, but it's going to share the stage for the first time in 80 years. A gold-backed BRICS currency or trade unit isn't some conspiracy theory. It's a logical response to a system that has overextended itself. And whether it launches next year or 5 years from now, the preparation is happening right now. The world is splitting into two monetary camps, one built on fiat currency, government debt, and military enforcement, one built on commodities, gold backing, and bilateral agreements. Both will exist simultaneously for years, possibly decades, and your wealth will depend on understanding which side of that split your assets are on. History doesn't repeat, but the patterns are unmistakable. When reserve currencies change hands, those who see it coming prosper. Those who don't pay the price. Britain took 60 years to fully lose its status. We might be 10 years into that process for the dollar, or 20, or we might be in the final stages. Nobody knows for certain. But what we do know is this: China is buying gold. Russia is buying gold. Central banks globally are buying gold. BRICS nations are building payment alternatives. The petrodollar system is fraying. And for the first time since 1944, there's a credible alternative to dollar dominance on the horizon. The great bifurcation isn't coming. It's here. The only question is whether you're prepared for it. If this changed how you see the global financial system, remember that the patterns are always there in history. You just have to know where to look.